Have you ever felt a sudden pull, like something was trying to stop you? Picture this: the suitcase is packed, the tickets are printed, and your heart should be full of joy. But instead, something feels off. You can't explain it. Just a whisper in your chest, a weight in the air. What if that feeling isn't just anxiety, but a message, a warning from something greater, just before the world shifts beneath your feet? Today's story is not a tale of fear, but of faith, a real account of a mother whose heart carried a silent message, one she almost ignored. It's one of those rare, sacred moments when angel signs before tragedy appear quietly. Through a dream, a strange delay, a voice inside that says, "Wait." We're not here to preach. We're here to remember that life speaks in ways we don't always understand. And sometimes, listening makes all the difference. Because just before the worst can happen, something divine may intervene. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. She still remembers the silence. Not the silence you hear late at night, but the kind that lives inside you when something unknown is approaching. 2 nights before they were supposed to leave for Italy, Rachel Moreno had one of those dreams that don't feel like dreams at all. The kind that stays with you, like a hand gently pressed against your back long after you've woken up. In the dream, she was standing barefoot in a hallway so white it seemed to glow. The walls stretched endlessly without doors or windows, just stillness. At the far end, she saw the outline of an airplane door, closed, distant, silent. She didn't move toward it. She couldn't. Then came the voice, soft, feminine, neither warm nor cold, just certain. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from everywhere. "Don't board. Wait for the wind to change." That was all. Rachel woke up at 3:11 a.m., sitting up so fast it startled the cat at the foot of her bed. Her breath was shallow. The room felt colder than it should have. She looked over at David, asleep beside her, unaware of the quiet storm moving through her chest. "It's just stress," she whispered, convincing no one. "Just a dream." But something inside her paused. The next morning, the sky was clear, painted with soft streaks of amber and grey, but the stillness in Rachel's chest remained. It was like her heart had remembered something her mind was trying to forget. She didn't mention the dream, not to David, not to anyone. But as she packed her last pair of shoes into the suitcase, she hesitated. Something in her resisted the zipper, a strange feeling, like she was sealing something she might never reopen. And then the signs began. She stepped outside with the kids, Emma and Lucas, to take them for a last-minute errand. A wind so strong and sudden caught her off guard that she instinctively shielded the children, heart pounding. It came out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly as if it had only come for her. At the coffee shop, her phone screen flickered, glitched, froze, restarted itself. She laughed it off at first, forcing a smile to reassure the kids. But inside, her stomach tightened. At home, she reached for her favorite mug, the one with "Trust the Timing" printed in fading gold, and watched it slip from her hand before she even touched it fully. It shattered, not violently, just wrong. By evening, her world felt covered in a strange film, like reality was slightly off-center. Nothing terrible had happened, and yet everything felt like it almost had. That night, as she folded laundry in the living room, Emma came to her with a drawing. "Look, Mommy," she said, beaming, "I drew the plane." It was a child's sketch, simple, full of color. But one thing stood out, a giant red X across the sky. Rachel's breath uncaught. "Why did you draw that, sweetie?" Emma shrugged. I don't know, I just felt it. Rachel stared at the page for a long time after her daughter ran off. Something was pulling at her memory again. The hallway, the voice. Wait for the wind to change. By midnight, Rachel stood again in the kitchen, lights dimmed, holding the dream in her chest like a fragile thing she couldn't name. She looked out the window, no stars, just clouds drifting like thoughts. She whispered into the stillness, "If this means something, show me." Nothing answered. Not right away, but something had already begun, and whether it was fate, intuition, or a message sent by something we may never fully understand, Rachel had heard it, felt it. Something was trying to reach her. A quiet warning wrapped in symbols and silence. She didn't yet know what she was being saved from, only that something sacred was asking her to wait. And that night, for the first time in years, she left her suitcase untouched. Just in case. The next day felt lighter, or maybe Rachel was just trying harder to pretend it was. She told herself the dream was behind her. She even laughed at breakfast, made heart-shaped pancakes for the kids, and decided they'd take a break from the packing chaos. One last calm moment before the trip. So she took Emma and Lucas to a small cafe nestled between two old brick buildings, the kind of place with chipped teacups, soft music, and sunlight spilling through dusty windows like a memory. Rachel chose a table near the window. Outside, wind chimes stirred gently, even though there was no breeze. The kids were drawing on napkins. Rachel sipped her coffee, letting her mind drift. That's when she noticed the woman. She didn't see her walk in. She was just suddenly there. An older woman, maybe in her late 70s, with soft silver hair pulled into a loose braid. Her scarf caught Rachel's eye first. A delicate cloth covered in pale feather patterns that almost shimmered as she moved. She smiled, kind and calm, and approached Rachel's table as if they'd known each other once in another life. "Flying somewhere soon?" the woman asked, her voice light but clear. Rachel froze, blinking. Yes. Tomorrow, actually." The woman's expression shifted, just slightly. Her smile faded into something deeper, almost solemn. "Listen to the air," she said gently, as if choosing her words with care. "Sometimes it speaks, when it wants you to pause." Then, without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked away. Rachel blinked, stunned. She looked around. There was no reason for the woman to know about the trip. No luggage, no conversation. Nothing had been said out loud. "Wait!" Rachel stood quickly, glancing toward the counter. "Do you know that woman?" she asked the young barista, pointing toward the door. The barista tilted her head. "Who?" "The woman with the braid and the scarf. She just came over to my table." He looked confused. "I didn't see anyone like that." "And come in." Rachel turned slowly back to her table. The chair across from her was still slightly pushed out, as if someone had just been sitting there. Emma was coloring quietly when she looked up and said, almost to herself, "Mommy." Her scarf looked like angel wings. Rachel didn't answer. Couldn't. A cold flush ran from her neck to her spine. She glanced at the entrance. Empty. No one passing by. No one walking out. Something about the woman's eyes lingered. Not her words, but the feeling they left behind. A strange weight and softness, as if she knew something Rachel didn't. Rachel reached for her coffee, but stopped. Her hand was shaking. "Listen to the air." The words played again and again in her mind. Not a warning, a whisper, a breath, a pause. That afternoon the air outside shifted, just barely. The clouds moved slower. A single bird circled in place above the street lamp. Rachel stood by her car, holding her keys, and looked up without knowing why. Something invisible was unfolding, and though she had no name for it, she felt it. Not fear, not panic. Just that same quiet voice, hidden beneath the wind, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She didn't know yet that it was the last normal afternoon they'd have that week, but something did, and it was trying to speak. That evening, the sky turned a shade of deep violet, as if twilight had arrived early just for her. The air outside was unnaturally still, and even the usual city sounds seemed hushed, like the world itself was waiting for something. Rachel tucked the kids into bed with extra care. She lingered by their doors longer than usual, watching the soft rise and fall of their breath, the innocence of sleep. Emma had curled into a ball, hugging the same drawing with the red X. David was downstairs, finishing up travel details, unaware that something inside Rachel was quietly unraveling. She went to bed with a whisper of dread in her chest, praying it was just exhaustion. But dreams don't wait for logic. Sometime after midnight, she was back in the hallway. Only this time, it wasn't white. It was dim. The walls, once glowing, now seemed made of shadow. Soft, yet heavy, like fog soaked in sorrow. The same airplane door stood at the far end, but it no longer felt distant. It loomed, silent, sealed, and then the voice returned, clearer, closer. Delay your journey. Trust the silence. Rachel gasped awake, her body shaking before her eyes were even fully open. Her face was damp with tears she hadn't known were falling. The clock read 3:12 a.m., 1 minute later than the first dream. Her heart beat like a warning bell inside her chest. She didn't move for a while, just lay there wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling as if it held an answer. The shadows in the corners of the room felt too still. Eventually, she slipped out of bed and tiptoed downstairs, wrapping herself in a throw blanket and sitting alone in the living room. The house was silent, but not empty. She could feel it, the lingering presence of something unseen, like the memory of a voice still echoing in the air. Rachel sat in that quiet space, clutching the blanket like it might hold her together. Her mind looped through every moment of the last few days, the whisper in the dream, the gust of wind, the broken mug, the woman with the feathered scarf, the child's red X. Too many signs, too quiet to ignore. She felt her chest tighten, a deep ache, not fear, but the heaviness of knowing something before it happens. She whispered into the dark, voice trembling, "God, if this is you, please make it clearer." Her words felt small in the stillness. "I want to believe," she continued, her eyes wet again, "but I'm scared. I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want them to think I'm losing it." She waited. No thunder, no flickering lights, no sudden voices, just stillness. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt held, like someone was listening. Rachel stayed in that silence for a long time, breathing slowly, as if the quiet itself was answering her in its own way. There was no sign in the sky, no writing on the wall, only the soft, persistent pull in her heart. And for the first time she wondered, what if the real miracle isn't in the sign, but in choosing to listen? By morning, the suitcase by the door felt like it belonged to another version of her. Someone who hadn't been warned, someone still moving forward because that's what plans demanded. But Rachel couldn't keep carrying. The silence alone, the dream, the scarf, the voice, the stillness. It was all too much now to hold quietly. So after breakfast, when the kids had gone to play and the house felt momentarily calm, she turned to David. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched his arm. "Can we talk?" He looked up from his laptop, sensing the weight in her voice. "Of course." They sat on the couch, side by side, in the soft morning light filtering through the curtains. Rachel's words came slowly at first, unsure and careful, but soon everything spilled out. The hallway in her dreams, the whisper that had changed, the time on the clock, The cafe, the woman with the wings on her scarf, the strange wind, the silence. David listened without interrupting, his arms folded across his chest, not in dismissal but in thought. His eyes didn't leave hers. "So, you're saying we shouldn't go," he said finally, his voice measured, "because of a dream?" Rachel looked down at her hands. "Not just a dream," she whispered. "It's a feeling, David. It's in my body, like something is screaming inside of me, telling me not to get on that plane, telling me it's not safe, that we're not supposed to go yet." The room went quiet. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. David's brow furrowed, the way it always did when he was trying to understand something he couldn't quite see. He let out a soft breath, and then, gently, "If you really believe this, we'll reschedule." Rachel blinked, stunned. "You'd do that?" He looked at her, and for a moment all the tension between them melted. "I'd rather lose money than lose you." The words landed like a warm hand on her heart. Not dramatic, not loud, just true. And that truth undid her. Tears filled her eyes, silent and sudden. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The world outside continued on, birds in the distance, a car door closing, the hum of life uninterrupted. But inside, something deeper was happening, a turning, a surrender. They sat like that for a long time, the children asleep upstairs, the suitcase still by the door, the itinerary still printed, the trip still waiting. But Rachel's heart, for the first time in days, began to settle. She didn't have proof, only a knowing. And now, she wasn't carrying it alone. The morning of the flight came like a soft breath, quiet, pale, almost sacred. There was no rush to beat traffic, no last-minute checklists, no suitcases being zipped. In panic, the airport was no longer part of their world. Instead, Rachel stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Lucas sang off-key in the background and Emma made a mess with syrup. David sipped his coffee, reading the paper but watching her closely. It should have felt like a loss. Money was gone, plans were broken. The dream of Rome would have to wait. But strangely, it didn't feel wrong. The house held a strange stillness, not empty, not cold, almost blessed. The air had changed, like something had passed over them in the night and left only quiet behind. Rachel moved slowly that morning, every step filled with a kind of reverence. She kept glancing at the clock, as if part of her was still tracking the flight they were supposed to be on. 8:15 a.m., boarding time, 9:10 a.m., takeoff. She held her breath and said nothing. Then came 10:42 a.m. Her phone buzzed. One single notification. She didn't look right away. She was pouring juice, laughing with the kids. But something in her body knew, like a chill before the storm touches skin. She picked it up, read the alert. Her eyes didn't blink. Breaking news. Flight 1812 from JFK to Rome experiences catastrophic engine failure shortly after takeoff. Emergency landing attempt unsuccessful. Casualties confirmed. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers went cold. She didn't speak, just stared at the screen. That number, Flight 1812, was burned into her memory. She'd memorized it when she booked the tickets. She had written it on the fridge calendar, printed it on the itinerary for David's parents. That was their flight. David noticed her face change and reached for her hand. "What is it?" She turned the phone so he could see. He read it once, then again. He went still. Emma's voice echoed from the other room, singing nonsense, breaking the silence. Rachel looked at the window, the morning sun still shining, birds still flying. But her world had shifted. A deep stillness fell over her, a knowing, a sorrowful kind of gratitude that brought tears without words. Not relief, not victory, just awe. Something had been trying to reach her, a voice a wind, a woman with angel wings on her scarf, and she'd listened. She didn't say anything for a while. Neither did David. They sat together at the kitchen table, hands still clasped, as the weight of what could have been settled quietly into the room. Outside, life moved on, but inside, they knew they'd been spared. Not by luck, not by logic, but by something gentler, wiser, invisible, and maybe by an angel who walked into a cafe wearing feathers. The phone slipped from Rachel's hands before she even realized she'd let it go. It hit the floor with a soft thud, screen still glowing, the words etched into it, refusing to disappear. David picked it up slowly, his eyes scanning the alert again. His face went pale, the kind of pale that comes not from fear, but from the sudden collapse of everything you thought you understood. They didn't speak. Not at first. The house around them seemed to go silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then Emma looked up from her drawing. Her small voice broke the stillness. "Mom?" Rachel turned toward her, but it was like moving through water. Everything felt slow, heavy. She reached for her daughter, pulling her into her arms. She didn't say much, just held her, tight, like her life depended on it. Tears came, quiet and without force, slipping down her cheeks as she whispered into Emma's hair, "We're okay, baby." But the words felt fragile, like glass balancing on the edge of truth. Because deep down, Rachel knew they were only okay because something had intervened. The television stayed on most of that day, the news looping over and over, the footage of the crash site, experts speculating about engine failure, interviews with stunned airport staff, scrolling banners of names yet to be confirmed. There were no answers, only noise. But Rachel didn't need answers, not from a reporter, not from a black box. She already knew the truth. The voice in the hallway, the woman with the wings, the wind, the whisper, "Wait for the wind to change." Those weren't coincidences, they weren't stress dreams or symbols of anxiety. They were warnings, and she had heard them. She sat in the living room with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, the same one from the night before. Her fingers clutched the edge of it, as if it held some invisible thread to the presence she couldn't name. David was quiet too. He checked on the kids, made tea neither of them drank, and sat beside her. They exchanged looks that spoke without words, looks that carried weight. That said, we almost didn't make it. Outside, the wind stirred again, just a soft breath, enough to rattle the wind chimes that had been still the day before. Rachel looked out the window and whispered, "Thank you," not to a god she could see, not to a figure in the sky, but to whoever or whatever had been watching. Because something had been, and though she couldn't prove it, she didn't need to. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in dreams and feathers and silence, and sometimes it saves you. That night, after the children had fallen asleep and the house had dimmed into a soft hush, Rachel lit a single candle. Its glow flickered gently against the walls, casting long shadows that danced like memories. She didn't turn on any lights. She didn't need to see clearly. She knelt by the window, the same place she had stood so many times in the days before, searching the sky, asking silently for clarity. Now, she wasn't searching. She was surrendering. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not out of fear or grief, but from something deeper, something words couldn't touch. With her palms pressed together and her forehead resting against the cool glass, she whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are, whatever you are. Thank you." She didn't need a name. She just knew she hadn't been alone. The voice, the woman, the wind, the dream. Something had reached through the noise of life, through plans, logic, and calendars, to pull her back from a path she wasn't meant to take. Rachel sat down at the table, lit only by the candle's glow, and began to write. Not for herself, for anyone who might one day feel that same whisper in their chest and wonder if they were imagining it. She wrote down everything. The first dream, the white hallway, the sealed door, the scarf with feathers, the stranger's words, listen to the air, the shift in the wind, the red X in Emma's drawing, the stillness before the news, every detail, every shiver, every moment she almost dismissed, because now she knew. There are signs. Sometimes they arrive like thunder. Other times they come as a quiet breath at 3:11 in the morning, but they come. And they wait for someone willing to listen. Rachel's faith, once quiet, once hidden behind doubt and routine, had awakened. Not out of fear, but from awe, a sacred kind of awe that doesn't shout or demand, but wraps itself around you gently, like wings you didn't know were there. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't need them. Only the stillness remained now, and in that stillness, peace. Weeks passed. Life, in its quiet way, moved forward, but never back to the way it had been. The tickets were rebooked. The destination remained the same, Rome. The itinerary nearly identical. But for Rachel, everything felt different. Not because of fear, because of reverence. As they packed again, laughter returned to their home. The heaviness was gone, but something else had taken its place. A kind of quiet respect for the unseen, for the pauses, for the delicate threads that had kept them safe. At the airport, Rachel moved slowly, not cautiously, intentionally. She noticed things she wouldn't have before. A man helping an elderly woman with her suitcase, a mother calming a restless baby, a flight attendant offering a smile that lingered a second longer than expected. Every moment carried weight now. Every gust of wind that brushed her face at the gate felt like a breath from something beyond this world. When they boarded, Rachel sat between her children, her hand resting gently over Emma's small fingers and Lucas's wiggling legs. She didn't speak much. She didn't have to. As the plane began to rise, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Not asking, just thanking. For the dream, for the warning, for the stillness that had saved them. The air around her felt warm, not heavy, not strange, just present, like someone was still there, not watching from a distance, but walking beside them, silent and unseen, not gone, just quiet. And Rachel, who once doubted the whisper, now carried it with her, everywhere. Rachel never planned to share her story. At first, it felt too sacred, too fragile to speak aloud. But as the days passed, something inside her began to change. It wasn't just gratitude, it was responsibility. A quiet pull to give voice to what had saved them, not to claim answers, but to offer light, in case someone else was walking through their own silence, wondering whether to trust it. She spoke first at her small church group. Hands trembling, voice shaking, but the room listened, not just with ears, but with hearts. Later, she sent her testimony to a spiritual podcast she had always admired. They read it aloud, and the story began to move, softly, like wind, through leaves. The dream that saved us, that's what they called it. And soon, strangers began writing to her. From cities she'd never been, from languages she barely understood. Messages that began the same way. I thought I was the only one. I had a dream like that too. I didn't tell anyone, but your story helped me trust it. People began sharing their own moments. Strange hesitations, vivid dreams, gentle warnings they couldn't explain. Rachel never claimed to be chosen, never claimed to be gifted. She always said the same thing, softly, sincerely. I'm not special, I just listened. And that became her truth, that angels don't always appear with wings. Sometimes they arrive as a voice in a hallway you've never seen, sometimes as a stranger in a cafe with eyes that see deeper than time, sometimes in your child's drawing, or in the wind that moves only for you. And more often than not, they speak not through noise, but through stillness, the kind of stillness that asks you to pause, to breathe, to believe. To this day, Rachel tells anyone who will listen, you just have to trust the silence and believe the whisper. Because the whisper is where faith begins, not in certainty, not in signs that shout, but in that sacred space between knowing and not knowing, where something greater reaches out and waits for you to answer. Maybe you felt it. Maybe there was a time you were about to say yes or no, and something inside you shifted. A dream you couldn't explain. A delay that saved you. A moment you'll never forget, but still don't understand. Have you ever experienced a sign like this? Do you believe it was just coincidence? Or something divine? What would you have done if this had happened to your family? Do you think angels are trying to guide us, even when we don't notice? We don't ask these questions to find certainty. We ask them to open the door, because somewhere, right now, someone else is standing at the edge of a decision. And maybe their sign hasn't come loudly either. Maybe it's quiet, like a breath, like a whisper, and maybe your story, like Rachel's, could help them hear it. So if this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.